second series of, I guess, webinar, if you must. Just supporting everybody in the community across the world as we all go virtual. And obviously, just I would like to emphasize that the reason we're doing this is not so much because there's an expectation that everyone needs to get up to speed, but more just if you are interested in, continuing to engage with your community or would like to figure out how do I actually get on with this whole, managing virtual communities and talking to my screen while engaging other people. I think we've got some really good people who can talk to us about it and share their experiences. So just to give a bit of an outline of this afternoon's call, will be first starting off with my colleague Sarah Thiam, who's based in Singapore. She is a cloud advocacy program manager who looks after the Asia Pacific region. And I guess we'll be giving her around 15 minutes to talk about her experience engaging with communities, different platforms that she thinks and she has seen other people have been using, bit of a pros and cons kind of a conversation with us. And then we'll stop after that for some questions for Sarah, after which we will be moving on to Sonia Cuff, who is based in Brisbane, former MVP and now a senior cloud advocate, and still raising the IT Pro flag for us IT pros. I say us, I'm not one of them, but for the IT pros out there, who will be basically sharing with us some of her tips as a renowned presenter globally, and how to actually engage with your audience when what you're looking at is a screen, and potentially now, like, as far as I'm concerned, 9 images of people with floating heads. And then after that, we will ask questions as well. Now, again, just for everyone's awareness, and especially our speakers, we do have members of the audience whose first language is not English. So let's just be mindful of that as we speak. Just speak a bit slower so they can catch up with us. I will also be moderating the call, and if there are any questions that you have that you'd like, our speakers to answer, feel free to drop it in the chat window. And we will, again, as I mentioned, pause for a few minutes in between 2 presentations to take questions from the audience as well. So on that note, I am putting myself on mute and handing over to Sarah, who will be kicking us off this afternoon. Over to you, Sarah.
Okay, hi. Hi everyone. Is my camera okay, or is it like laggy? Just checking.
Your camera is a bit okay. Let's give it a. It's not laggy, but you're a bit pixelated. That's all. But
Okay.
that could be me because internet in Australia is not fantastic.
It's looking fine for me, Shiva. So maybe it's on your end.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me as well here in New Zealand.
Awesome, great. I just want to check, because the Wi-Fi has been a bit wonky in Singapore. I think because everyone is using it right now. I just want to tell everyone that as of yesterday evening, Singapore extended our unofficial lockdown for 4 more weeks. So we're all stuck at home for a total of 6 more weeks. Like everyone's not supposed to go out, and they have cut off the bubble tea supply, so everyone is freaking out. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna start. Thanks so much, Shiva, for having me, and thanks all of you for joining. I'm just gonna try to share my screen real quick. Here it is. Can you all see my screen good? Yep. Should be up now.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yes, we can see your
Awesome,
screen,
great. So yeah, I'm gonna start real quick. So for me, I'm gonna share a bit about community management and going remote. I know, Shiva, you invited me to talk about events, and I will cover that as part of my talk. But for the first half of it, I do want to talk a little bit around remote community engagement that I've seen so far across the board. So the reason why I'm coming on board to talk about this is because Singapore, as all of you know, were one of the more earlier affected countries by COVID, and so we've been through, I would say, a more mature cycle of where we are at right now amongst the developer communities, and how we've all reacted to it. And so the conversation has evolved a lot beyond events. I think people do pivot to events really quickly when you immediately need to go online. But on top of that, now we're exploring things like forums, chats, connection points, and so on to keep that community vibe going. So I'm going to share a bit of that learnings with all of you. And then at the second half, I'll jump into how some tips and tricks around Teams Live. Of course, there's a lot of good documentation out there already on docs.microsoft.com. But having done a few of them myself, I think there are a few tips and tricks that you need to be aware of before you actually run them, so that you don't make the mistakes that I did. So that's what I'll cover for now. So I'm sharing this slide because I think it's just the time for all of us to connect a little bit. Definitely, as the situation goes on in your area, these are the kind of like comments and the questions that will come from developer communities. So first, when it first hit, like we had our first 5 to 10 cases, I think people started asking, like, guessing whether the situation is that bad. And then we had questions around, like, should we cancel or postpone? And then people started coming to community leaders and asking questions around, like, how do we go virtual very quickly? So whatever stage that you're at, I think we're all at different stages in the areas that we are in. But yeah, you can expect all these questions to kind of come around. So I'm sharing now 5 things around, like, aggregated thinking structures that I've seen from few different communities. So I've been trying to help a few communities go more remote. So MVPs in Indonesia, I'm working together with them for their communities, and they're asking questions like, how have you done it in Singapore? Because I've been working with a few Singapore non-Microsoft communities to go online. Definitely, we talk about Teams, but we also talk about Zoom and all these other platforms. So I'm just sharing some of the thoughts here. So the first one will be around finding remote alternatives for any in-person elements. I think all up, we still want to make sure that we maintain that community element. And how do you do that when you're at a meetup and you get to do pizza and talk to people and get to walk up and talk to people one-to-one, but you're not able to do that during a remote conversation? So a few things that I've seen that are really cool. Virtual Azure Community Day run by the MVP and DevRel team in EMEA did like a virtual cheers, and this is definitely dependent on culture. You can do like a virtual dinner as well, like, everyone just having, I think JavaScript Singapore had like the first 15 minutes of their meetup dedicated to not doing anything but turning on your camera if you are able to, and eating your dinner and just asking each other questions, which at first I thought was a bit awkward, but then it led to really high engagement during the session. So I think these are things that we can think about as well. On top of just finding alternatives for in-person elements, can also think about what are the new opportunities for remote environments now. So like the stretching photo that I've included over here, now that we are all sitting at home a lot, having like a quick stretching session for everyone is also a fun activity to do, to have that kind of community bonding. Okay, secondly, it's around addressing community needs in this time. So currently we cannot avoid the fact that we are going through a pandemic. I think that in your meetup formats, a lot of your content is going to be centered around these topics. There are like 4 main areas that I see that comes out of the community nowadays. And these are things that we've been talking about with a few communities as well. The first being, if you can look at the purple picture over there, that is like rapidpass.philippines. So that's actually a really good example of this need, that because developers are skilled with the skills of developing apps and solutions, there's always a sentiment, not with everyone, of course, like depending on whether you have bandwidth or not, to want to create a solution for your community. And so having a part of your content in your meetup dedicated to that piece is actually something that I think will be very engaging for your community as well. Like, there is a need in our community, how do we address it with the DevOps skills that we all have? That could be one way. Because, like, for example, DevCon Philippines came out with a solution, which is to allow their frontline workers to pass through migration points much more quickly with pre-verification online, aligned with the government's verification process, so that they can expedite the time that they need to get to people who need help. So that was a really good way. I think that also bonds the community very well. Another category is around job security. I think that is a very big reality nowadays. Retrenchment is definitely going up. People are worried about job security, and this is going to be top of mind. Before this address, I find it I've seen it a bit hard for developers to think about much else when they're worried about their job. So, if your meetup can dedicate a portion of the time to either networking or upskilling, how do they tap on like Microsoft Learn, for example, or any other self-paced resources to upskill and certify themselves, to get through this period, I think that would be really compelling content for your community as well. And then the last area is around the community bonding, which I talked about earlier on. So I think these 4 areas are things that, content directions that you can look at during this period that will be very relevant to everyone. Okay, and then thirdly is around maintaining a safe and inclusive space online. I think this goes without saying, we all do it anyway, but it is easy to forget, especially when you are. I've seen like myself as well. I'm also I've also fallen prey to this, and I've seen other communities do it. When you have so many things to change, and when you have to change your big event to become online in a very short span of time, there are things that you're going to leave out. It's easy to forget about mentioning code of conduct. It's easy to forget about how do you prevent yourselves against Zoom bombing or any one-to-one online harassments that happen in the back end. These are things that we need to think about. So I think safety is very important. I think dedicate some time in your meetup formats to think about how you want to cater for that. And also inclusivity for different, everyone's adjusting to a new routine at home. We are now all this BBC News guy with our kids walking in. If you have kids, or my mom keeps coming every 20 minutes, so it's a bit hard for me to have meetings. How do you be inclusive of that and make them feel comfortable and not like stressed out about this happening? So like when I was talking to my other colleague who has a kid, and we've made it like pretty open knowledge across the team that it's very okay for her kid to join her in the call and like just be there with her while she does her call, and that's fine. Time zone is definitely a thing. I think international globalization of your meetups is going to be more and more common. So how do we be mindful of time zones, and how do we always, I think best practice is definitely to have your on-demand option always on. So always have that video content recorded so that people can access it afterwards in their own time zone, or even if they have to cook dinner for their family, how do they access it at a better time for them? Okay, and then next is around finding out the new normal for your community. So the reason why I put this in is because I was involved in, so I was asked to join this talk around like DevRel professionals in the US because of the Singapore being hit earlier on. So they were asking me like, can you please share any learnings that you have, because it's happening to us right now. So that's why I joined the meetup. And I think one of the things that was raised that I thought was a really good point was around like, what is your new social customs moving forward? So this is something that every community will need to figure out for themselves. These are things that like we don't really say when we're in person, because we kind of get used to each other after a while and we form our own normal and our own culture in person. But when you are remote and you're isolated, it has to be more of an intentional effort to find out what is the new social norm for your community. So social norm being like, for example, do we raise up our hand when we do we press the raise hand button when we want to ask a question in the call, or do we just unmute and ask the question? Simple things like that. How often is our meetups going to happen now that it's all remote? And do we do alternate time zones as we do it, for example? So these are things to think about for your community. The only 2 things I encourage you to think about is to think beyond events. Events is not the only way to connect with your community, and also to think beyond COVID-19 pandemic, like longer term, when we come out of this pandemic, hopefully by the end of 2020, when it comes to 2021, will it be like 50% virtual and 50% in person? And if this is the case, what will be the new normal for your community? So kind of planning ahead on what will happen then. And lastly, to share your learnings, because I'll give an example. When it first happened here, I went online and tried to search for like, how do I manage people's expectations when an event is cancelled? How do I manage community during a crisis? And there was no resources that were available at that point of time. So I started writing my own learnings. Right now, definitely there's like a saturation of all these kind of thought leadership, but there's always opportunity for you to add on more. So we're all learning. I really encourage all of you to keep writing and to be sharing more resources and creating more resources for everyone to learn from. Again, there can always be global resources, but it will always be that much more helpful to your area's community if you write it in your local context. So yeah, encourage all of you to keep sharing your learnings. Okay, so I'll jump into the how-to tips and tricks for Teams Live. This will be a quicker portion because there is a lot of documentation out there, but I'll share some tips and tricks. First of all, ask yourself, is live stream the best option? Live stream itself has its pros, but it also has its, I wouldn't say cons, but like it has its own like balance of things. Live stream is very unforgiving. All your mistakes will be seen on live stream. You have to rehearse a lot. Don't underestimate live stream, I would say, because production quality is almost as high as an in-person event. So think about all these things and whether a meeting would suffice. Do you really need a live stream for 50 people? Would it, if it's 100 people, a live stream would make sense, but if it's smaller, maybe you want to do a meeting instead. Okay, so if you are fixed on Teams Live as a live stream, just a few questions to think about backend setup. I've added in some links over here to docs.microsoft.com, and also I'll share the slides with Shiva later on so you can click on them. Who can produce and present? I think this is a good point to raise up. Please take note of this because on Teams Live, not everyone can present. Only those with the Office subscription or a guest license or guest access assigned to that user can actually present. Even though you already, you with your, as an MVP with your Office 365 subscription can schedule the event and produce the event. If you want to bring on an external guest in your community to present, you have to check out the rights and try it out and check out the link to see how you can make sure that they have the rights to do so. Because we had to create a demo account for external presenters to present, so that was a bit tricky. Accessing the recording, you can always download it, but if you want to be able to host it on some other site, make sure that you determine all this beforehand. How to set it up, there's a pretty easy link on how you can set it up that is completely detailed step by step. I will say that a tip is to make sure that you turn on the audience options. The screenshot that you see over here on the Teams piece here is important to note because when you schedule the event, you can see that the last checkbox is actually empty, so your Q&A is actually empty. If you don't check all your options beforehand, you're going to enter your Teams Live event and you cannot edit it afterwards. So you might not have a moderated Q&A. So I would say make sure that you turn that on. And then lastly, consider OBS and Restream. Like how do you want to, I think this diagram does a good description of the opportunities that you have. So if you do a Teams Live and you go to OBS Studio and then Restream it, you can actually put it onto many more platforms, which I see as a best practice nowadays in a lot of meetups out there. So do consider that and check it out. The link over there is actually written by another ex-MVP and now a cloud advocate, Hank Bowman from my team. But yeah, it's a pretty good step-by-step on how you can do so. Okay, pre-event for Teams, please note that if you do a Teams Live, you can't actually have any registrations. It will just be a live link, so people might easily forget this link. That's one. Secondly, you won't be able to measure how many people are actually RSVPing for your event. So you want to make sure that best practice is have a meetup.com page or have some kind of event registration page so you can gauge the number of RSVPs and then send the attendee live link to those people who have RSVP'd along with a save the date calendar invite so they don't forget the actual event is happening. Also make sure that you talk about privacy policy like what Shiva did earlier on, letting people know that it's being recorded. Sometimes people are not aware. This comes back to the point of it's very different and much more intentional when we do things online. So letting people know it's actually being recorded. Also letting your attendees know how to attend Teams Live and how to make the best of their experience. What I've learned as well through mine is that people might not be very familiar with the platform. Same goes for Zoom, same goes for any platform that you use. Don't assume that people are familiar with it. Us who are tech savvy might be, but other people might not. So let them know how to use it beforehand as a pre-read so that when they enter the meeting, they know how to best maximize their experience. Fourthly, rehearse, always rehearse for live stream. Everything can go wrong and it will go wrong. So rehearse as much as possible. Rehearse with all your speakers. Make sure that everyone has clicked through all the platforms to actually stream their stuff, try presenting, check out your recording and make sure they work. And particularly for Teams Live, don't ever use the actual link to rehearse because I shared the screenshot below, which is my face, which is what happened was that I had my Teams Live event. I clicked start live event 10 minutes before the actual event started. And then I rehearsed with the speaker really quickly, and then I ended the Teams Live event, and I couldn't revive the link. So my whole link after 2 weeks of demand gen, when everyone knows about that link, was no longer being able to be used. And yeah, it was a huge mess. But anyway, don't use your actual link to rehearse is my point. And then during the event, code of conduct, housekeeping, again, reminding people how to maximize their experience and what is the code of conduct for that session is really important. I will say the dream team on-site, which is what you must have to have a good live stream event on-site, is to make sure that you have different people for each of the roles that I've listed here. Try not to double up, because when we doubled up roles, because it's live stream and all your mistakes are very easily seen, if you don't have an actual person for each of them, you're going to be overwhelmed and you're going to make mistakes for sure. So make sure you have a producer that is your one main point to decide what goes live and what does not, and everything should feed back to your producer to decide. You have your videographer who's in charge of filmography and the cameras to make sure everything's set up well. Your host should be separate from everything else, so that they can carry themselves well and be able to host the audience in a really good way. Quality assurance, just having someone to watch the video and make sure nothing's going wrong as an attendee, and letting the producer know if anything seems to be off. Social media moderator, because we are now online, the opportunity is that we can be a lot more social since everyone's already on the desktop. So have someone to monitor the chat, have someone to be engaging people on Twitter. That's really important. Backup devices, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. So have your backup devices ready. Have your backup speakers as well, just in case. So have your speaker number 2 come on before speaker number 1 finishes, like way at the start of their talk, just in case. And lastly, have a runner in case of anything else, so you can ask someone to pass these materials around because you're not going to be able to leave your station. And then thirdly, for Teams Live, moderated Q&A is great because you can moderate the conversation, but it also has its cons, which is that it's a little bit limited on interactivity. And if you want to have a bustling conversation, it is not going to look as interactive as YouTube Live, for example, where the comment section is like free flow. So you might want to think about having like an external social tool, maybe like a sli.do, which is a great tool to use, where you can ask questions and people can just put in their comments or have some fun interactivity at the side of your Teams Live event, and that can tie into your social as well. And lastly, be forgiving of everyone, because again, be forgiving. It's okay. Your audience will also be very forgiving of you. I've watched a lot of live streams today so far, and all of them have mistakes, so no one's safe from it. So it's okay. Don't freak out. Just keep going. Okay, and that's all from me. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. That was so good.
Thank you.
My request now is, let's just keep everyone on mute. And if there is anyone who has a question for Sarah, I'm just mindful that we have over 50 people in the call and we don't want people speaking over each other. I'd love for you to just indicate in the chat window if you would like to ask Sarah a question. Sarah, one of the questions is from Nelly Setari, and she's asking, what was the name of the app for asking questions from people that you had mentioned?
I'm going to key it in here in the chat. It's called sli.do. So this one is really great to have like a visible board for everyone to see the questions that are coming in. And also that there are other functions of it, so you can do like a poll as well. I would say like there is a moderated Q&A on Teams Live, but it is pretty restrictive because people submit questions, and then the moderator will have to choose to publish or not to publish, and so on. So there's many keys to it, which is good for a professional setting, but for developer communities, it's a bit boring. Yeah. So I keyed in the link over there, so please do check it out.
Okay, we have another question from Wagner. What would you recommend for small groups less than 50? Do you think it's worth for them to use Teams Live or just set up a Teams call like what we're actually doing today?
So I think it depends on whether your community is familiar with themselves, like amongst each other. So if your community is well known, you all know each other, I think a Teams meeting is safe because you know that we're going to be respectful of each other, we more or less know each other, and we can interact. What happens if you have a Teams meeting with 50 people who don't know each other is that you're going to get a lot of silence, and you probably will expect more interactivity and ask these questions, but it's going to appear a lot more dead than it actually is. So for that case, if you're unfamiliar, I would say use a Teams Live broadcast. Yeah.
Okay. I'd love to just pause for a bit shorter to ask our community members from China, Japan, and the rest of Asia if you have any questions for Sarah. Just please indicate in the chat window if you have a question so I can call on you, or you can also type. Okay, I've got a raised hand from Rory Braybrook from New Zealand. Rory, please feel free to ask your question from Sarah.
Yeah, hi Sarah. I was just wondering at the moment, when we're all at home and we're trying to get a user group online and we don't have cameras and we don't have all these whizzy things, can you run a Teams live event from your PC, or wouldn't you recommend it?
You can run a Teams live event from your PC. It can. So I'm experienced. So the previous one that I did was with a full production crew, which was actually more problematic because we had an external encoder to link up to a video camera. Now, if you're running it from your PC, it's going to be a lot safer and a lot easier to run because everything is just your webcam directly into the event itself. So I think you're much better off on a PC, actually. I said the production quality will not be super high, but if your community is okay with that, I think it's fine.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah. And also, like, you can use like snap cameras if you're using your webcam. So I'm actually using a snap camera with like fake eyelashes, if you can see. That's why my face is pixelated, because it's actually a filter. But yes, it's always fun to use.
Okay, well, how about, I'm sure, Sarah, you'll be hanging around for the rest of the call while people are still probably letting everything set in. Thank you so much for that very interesting and good range of examples you've shared with us in globally, really. And I think it's a good, like fodder for us to think about, what other people in different communities are doing. So excellent. Thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank you.
Now I will hand over to Sonia Koff. Over to you, Sonia.
Hi, everybody. I'm wearing my Microsoft Ignite t-shirt because I'm a little bit sad of the announcement that it's going virtual. And of course, last November, I was standing in front of rooms of, 5,000 odd people talking to them. So I'm a little bit sad. This is a little bit of reminiscing for me. It's important to know that not everybody is a natural public speaker. And even if it's not something that comes naturally, not everybody is racing to jump up on that stage in front of that big room of people. And I think it's important that we realize that just because we're in an age where we're doing a lot more remote events doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's racing to jump in front of the web camera either. We have some great MVPs who write amazing content online. They've got great blogs and they answer questions in the forums, and you don't necessarily need to think that now you have to become this, online in front of camera superstar, because this is the age we're in right now. But let's explore getting out of our comfort zones a little bit and see what speakercraft looks like when we're staring to this non-blinking little hard piece of hardware sitting on top of my monitor screen. Live camera is different to recorded camera. So if you are used to preparing something and getting the ability to talk to camera and have that recorded, edited, do a few different shots, like that is a very different scenario to going on live online in front of all these people at once. But I know that we have some great MVPs in our community that are already doing this really well. I do feel like I'm kind of teaching you how to suck eggs a little bit, because I know that there are some great people that have got some advice in there as well. But this is kind of just my take on it. It's completely natural to be nervous, whether it's doing an in-person meeting or a big talk or a camera. One of the interesting things is how our nerves come out. And I watched a presentation with someone who wasn't used to doing on-camera work, very good on person and stage, and their nerves came out by them shifting their weight from one foot to another. They didn't have that big stage to roam around in, and you could see that that was just a little sign that they had a little bit of nervous energy in them that didn't really have anywhere to go. And so it's completely fine to be nervous, and just watch a little bit about the tells that are coming out with your body language. Let's talk a little bit about environment. Now, I've cheated a little bit today. I've had one of those days. I've had to log a fault call on my oven. I've logged 2 blog reports on a product, and I've wrangled my 10-year-old meeting all of her work expectations for school for the day. It's been pretty full on. So I've cheated, and I'm coming you from the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Instead of preparing my room and making sure things like I don't have things that I don't want to be in shot, personal information, Heaven forbid anybody writes up passwords these days. And my background is generally clutter-free and it looks nice. I mean, my standard background when the office is tidy is my orange wall with my MVP awards on the back. So just put a little bit of thought into that. Also have a look at your lighting, and I don't particularly have the best lighting here tonight, but one of the things I am conscious of and I get a glimpse of every now and again is lighting that's reflecting in my glasses. Now this is a problem I don't have when I'm on stage because I don't wear glasses normally, but I do wear them when I'm reading documents and I'm looking at my computer, and so that's another thing for me. And again, I did watch a presentation with somebody the other day and all I could see was the reflection in their glasses of their room lighting, and it was really distracting. So that's something that I have to be careful of when I'm talking. Next thing is microphone placement, or maybe you're going to be using a headset. And I had a conversation with somebody about that the other day. Which do you prefer and what do you use? I tend to use a headset if there's other stuff going on around my environment. So right now, my family are on a very severe be quiet order. You know, mum's working. And so there are less chances for me to get background noise from what I'm talking about. But sometimes I do prefer to wear a headset just to remove any of those distractions. Right now, I'm speaking into a Blue Yeti microphone that has a pop filter on it and a foam surround. That helps cut down some of the background noise, and I don't want to get too much into the mechanics of the different equipment and what you use, but I've got that placed right above my web camera. So as I'm looking at the camera and as I'm talking to you, I'm talking straight directly into the front of that microphone. It's also very important to know where your microphone gets its sound feed from, because some microphones will pick up from the side and some microphones will only pick up directly from the end. So just know your mic and how you're going to place that. Let's talk about, there's my dog in the background, there you go. So let's talk about some of the things that we think about when we're putting together a talk. To start with, start strong, because when I came onto the call, the first thing I said to you wasn't, hi, I'm Sonia Cuff and I work for Microsoft and I've been doing this for so many years and today I'm going to talk to you about the thing, right? I've got your attention. I want to keep it. So I'm going to be animated and go, look at my t-shirt. This is why I wore the t-shirt today. And that grabbed your attention and it's formed a bit of a relationship with us because of this story. And it's a little bit more interesting than a more boring intro about who I am and why you should listen to me, right? Next thing, I want you to trust that people can see your screen. And if you're not 100% sure that that is a thing or you really want that reassurance, here's a good trick that I use for Teams in particular. I join the meeting from more than one device. And you can do that. So right now, in addition to the device that's running my camera that I'm talking to you on, I have another device that I can see out of the corner of my eye that's running the same meeting, looking at what you are seeing. So I could see if my screen's going to pop up there or not. It's a nice little trick. Next thing is talk about how you're going to handle questions. And I would have come on and said how I was going to receive questions in this call, whether or not I was going to ask you to jump in during the talk, or whether or not I was expecting you to put them in the chat, or whether or not we were going to hold them off until the end. But Shiva actually covered that off nicely. And the way that we covered questions for Sarah's talk and the fact that she asked you to put them in the chat kind of covered that off as well. But it is nice to include that in your intro to your audience, to tell them what your expectation is of the questions. Please put your questions in the chat as we go, or there will be time at the end for Q&A for you to unmute your mic or to put your questions in the chat. So little tips like that. And Sarah also touched on audience participation. So are you interested in running things like polls? Will you ask questions of the audience as you go and ask people to put answers in the chat? And if you're someone on stage who's used to that, raise your hand if, or you're asking your audience questions as part of your talk, then look at how you would do that with the tools that you've got available for your remote platforms as well. And of course, different platforms have different capabilities for that. I have heard some people having a chat moderator, whether or not they have the luxury of having somebody in the room, or whether or not they can even use another app like WhatsApp on their phone, where they're keeping this sort of producer-presenter back channel about what's important, what's not working quite right, or important questions that the audience have asked to be addressed. So just think a little bit about how you're going to do that. Next thing, gestures and body language. I've broken one of my rules when I present remotely, and that is I'm going to encourage you to stand up. Whether that means putting your camera on a tripod, putting your laptop on a foot of yellow page phone directories, if you've even got those anymore, right? And the reason is when we give a talk in person, we're standing up generally, we're not sitting down. It means that your diaphragm is upright, you're getting air into your lungs better to control your voice, and it generally gives you more energy. If you're finding that a speaker online, even if you can't see their face, is coming across as a little bit flat in their tone of voice, it could be because they're actually sitting down delivering their meeting, and it would make a world of difference for them to stand up. Now, I did mention that I've broken my own rule on that one today. Reason being, last week I severely stubbed my right toe, and so I'm actually under doctor's orders to not stand up and to stay off that toe as much as possible. Okay, so another thing you've got to take into consideration is the field of view for your camera. It's more important if you're not using a custom background like I am, but if you are using just your normal room view, watch the boundaries of what your camera can see. And quite often in the modern cameras, the camera actually has quite a wide field of view. So you can actually have a bit of scope to see how wide you can go and make your body gestures big. A lot of the times when we talk on camera, we're just used to kind of sitting here and we think we need to be a statue. And it's quite common to freeze up a little in front of a camera and lose some of that animation that we normally have in person. Now, the trick is when you do something like a custom background, you'll notice that as I've done my hand gestures, sometimes my hands kind of fade in and out, and I get a little bit like like I lose parts of my limbs. So that's a slightly weird one that you've got to watch out if you're using features like these as well. The other thing is making sure that those body gestures are what I call above the fold. So going back old school, above the fold was a term we used to use for an article that was in the top half of the newspaper. So when the newspaper was folded in half, that story was visible, it was important. If you've bought advertising space at the bottom or your article's at the bottom of that fold, it doesn't get seen when it's sitting there on the newsagent's stand. And when we're talking about remote sessions and being on camera, we have this fold line where the camera cuts off at the bottom. And so especially if you are standing up, it's more natural in person to use your body language and use your gestures round about waist height. It doesn't quite work so well for camera. You need to bring your hands up like here in the club and just get used to the fact that that gives you a little bit more animation when you're talking to your audience. Now, eye contact. It's really weird to get used to staring down the barrel of that camera, but to your audience, it comes across so much better. It's easy to get distracted by looking down at your computer or looking off to the side. It's kind of weird because the camera doesn't look back the same way that people look back when you make eye contact with different people in different parts of your on-person audience. So don't stress too much about getting used to staring down the barrel of that camera, like it is your new best friend, and getting used to the fact that it won't stare back. And also, where is your content? So if you aren't using slides, or if you are using slides on screen, if you've got notes, where have you placed those and what happens to your eye contact when you look at them? I took a summary of bullet points of what I wanted to share with you tonight, and they're printed out on an A4 piece of paper right next to my camera. So every now and then I can glance at them, check where I was at in my topic, but I'm still maintaining as much of that eye contact as I can. So that's another little tip. What's your speed and your pausing? I find it a lot easier to pause when I talk on stage. And if you've ever seen any of my talks, especially my soft skills ones, I use the pause a lot. It's a very powerful tool when you're talking to an audience. The challenge is when you don't have that in-person feedback from the audience, your monologue can start to gather speed and suddenly it becomes like a bit of a freight train. So you've just got to watch to make sure that you slow yourself down a little bit. And it's okay to have a couple of seconds of silence between sentences or as you move from one piece of content to the next. On to visual aids. What are you going to present and how are you going to present it? Are you only going to be on camera? Are you going to do a full, whether it's 30 minutes or 60 minutes? Is it an on-camera presentation only? Is it only going to be PowerPoint slides? And yes, Amy, I love that. Googly eyes on your webcam. That's a great tip. So are you going to just be doing PowerPoint slides where you'll be sharing PowerPoints? And if you're doing that through Teams, great tip to actually upload the PowerPoint file to Teams and then share it. Share the PowerPoint from Teams. Don't share your desktop. It gives you some extra accessibility features for the participants to be able to move through the slides at their own pace. And it also means that your co-presenters can take over the sharing of that PowerPoint and driving it as well. And it means that you can still see the chat while you're doing the meeting as well, which you lose, of course, when you're screen sharing a slideshow for a PowerPoint deck. Will you have a combination? Is it going to be some camera stuff and some PowerPoint stuff? If so, practice your transitions. So beforehand, go into Teams, hit meet now. You can actually fire up a meeting with yourself and just practice switching between the camera to the PowerPoint sharing to the screen sharing for your demo so that that is as smooth as possible. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it perfect on the day, but nobody wants to watch you trying to find out how to find the file or how to switch from the camera to the desktop if you haven't practiced that already. Live demos versus recorded demos, and we'll talk a little bit about that later too. What do we do there? Do we throw ourselves at the mercy of the live demo gods like we often do on stage, or do we go with a pre-recorded option? And I have thoughts and opinions on this. We use recorded demos quite heavily in our Ignite content because of the time that it takes to do IT operations tasks. And so nobody wants to be sitting waiting while an Active Directory controller replicates for 2 hours, right? And so we pre-record a lot of stuff to time slice it, to speed up boring typing into text boxes and stuff like that. So that can be a very effective way of being able to show something on screen. I personally use VLC Player and I use the spacebar to pause the video and unpause the video. And then I edit my videos so they're pretty tight for time. But then I use that pause so that when I talk, the video can progress when I want it to. It can stop when I want to explain something in detail. And I don't have to try and stick to the same timing of what I thought I was going to say when I recorded it. So that's another tip about recorded demos. PowerPoint slides, please change your slides frequently. Slides are cheap. They don't cost you anything. And I've recorded content for Pluralsight where the general rule is that a slide should not be on screen for any longer than 30 seconds. You don't want to leave the same slide on screen for 5 minutes because you're going to lose people's attention and they're going to wander. So generally, we would like to use one slide per point. Not per thing with multiple bullet points, like literally one slide per bullet point. And that seems pretty rapid fire, but that change in visual is really good for attention. And you can then use a summary slide to bring everything together. So you could start off with an intro slide with more than one point. You could then fire off to different slides to illustrate each of those points and then maybe come back to a summary slide. But again, figure out what works for you. Some of that depends on your audience and the content that you're delivering as well. If you are showing your desktop, tidy it up. Nobody wants to see all your files on the desktop. And even more importantly, if you can go to the extra step to do things like minimizing your taskbar, like auto hiding your taskbar, removing the clock off your screen. That's a really good one for longevity of your videos, so that you don't have that kind of down there as a marker and a distraction with the date and time. So do that to clean up the display of the applications that you're using. So if you're going to demonstrate, say, that Azure portal in a browser or VS Code or whatever it is, you can just spend a few minutes making sure that the zoom level inside the application or the browser is correct. Hide any unused menus. And I get into the habit, particularly with the Azure portal, as I'm demoing something, of actually collapsing the blades, which are those menu options down the left-hand side, collapsing them off to the side as I talk through something to give me extra screen real estate for the thing that I'm talking about. So just be conscious of what you can do with an application to make it a little clearer, a little less cluttered and distracting for people, and really focus on what it is that you're showing. Screen resolution, generally when we do demos, we record them in 1920 by 1080, and it feels like a really old school, but it's like universally accepted. Like that kind of resolution makes the text nice and big, it will work on any screen, and it means that nobody needs a magnifying glass to actually go in and have a look at what they're doing. Amy, you mentioned extra desktops. Yeah, I actually use that in Windows 10 as well. So when I'm presenting on stage, I'll use one Windows desktop for my slides, and I'll use other Windows desktops for other application, and I'll just use that Control Windows arrow key to flick through the different desktops. And I've done that for recorded presentations as well. That's another really good tip. Watch out for any sensitive files that you've got in those recently used lists. So if you're going into applications that you've been in before and you've got names in there of Word documents you've worked on, for example, or you're even going into File Explorer to open up a script, for example, just watch what extra information is popping up on your screen when you're showing those kind of applications. And finally, close off any of your other applications and turn off your notifications. Use quiet hours in Windows 10 to suppress those. Don't leave Outlook open if it's not the thing that you're talking about. Just be a little mindful about getting rid of some of the clutter and turning off things like Outlook from reminding you that you've got another meeting coming up as well. Those are most of my tips. I would like you to close your presentation by making sure that people have got your contact details. And so if you don't know already, you can find me on Twitter at Sonia Cuff, or Shiva knows where to get hold of me, and hang around at the end. Like if you've got time, you can absolutely turn around and say to your audience, thanks for your time. I'm happy to hang around here on the chat for another 15 minutes if, you know, and don't be in a quite as a rush to rush off. That's something that we get with in-person events, where we're conscious of the fact that people need time to walk down all of those hallways to get to the next session, which is sometimes quite far away, or we've got a really short changeover between me getting out of the room so the next presenter can come in and set up. So we don't always have those constraints with a live event. Hang around and tell your audience that you're available to talk to them, and see if you can be available and make it a little bit more social. So those are my tips. If you're interested in actually referencing these over and above the meeting recording that I know that Shiva will publish, soniacuff.com, I actually blogged about this, which is why I was asked to come and talk to you. So I have a blog post up there called So Now You're a Remote Presenter that covers a lot of these tips. And as we wrap up, as well as any questions that you pop in the chat, thank you, Amy, for jumping in with a few of those. There are a lot of experienced people in this group. Please also jump into the chat and tell me what I've missed. Even better, go to my blog post and add a comment. But any other things of tips in terms of this side of Speakercraft that you can think of that you'd like to tell the group? Thanks, Shiva.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sonia. We do have a couple of questions. One is more a request. Would you be able to do a quick demo of what you meant earlier by uploading your presentation onto Teams and using that instead of sharing your screen, by sharing your screen?
I actually can't, because I can't, in Teams, I can't share the screen and do a share the slide at the same time, but I can talk you through it. So what you do is you go down to the meeting where you've got the square box with the arrow on it and it says share. And if you, everybody can click on that at the moment in this meeting anyway. I'm just going to move some of my screens around so I can see better. So when you lift up that sharing tray, you've got a couple of different options. One is desktop, one is window, and one you'll see you've got PowerPoint, and there it also says browse. If you click on browse, browse will say browse Teams and channels, browse OneDrive, or upload from my computer. So what I tend to do is I go into Teams before the meeting and I upload the PowerPoint into the files tab into the channel of my team, or I put it in OneDrive. And then this is how you do it. You do the browse there and you go either browse Teams and channels and you find it through the Teams structure in your files tab, or it's also supported from OneDrive. And then you get those extra sharing options. I'm just not 100% sure that I can find something easily to show you the experience, but that in essence is how you do it. It's just another option in that sharing tray.
Sounds good. Now, to be sure, because Ingeborg had pointed out that some people end up showing the edit mode and, you know, navigate while, you know, like having that pane on the left-hand side while they're actually presenting. So we just want to make sure that if you do decide that you want to upload your presentation, that you're actually presenting still in presenter mode. Correct.
Yeah, so using the sharing tray and actually sharing PowerPoint itself shares the PowerPoint in presentation mode, in essence. Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, our second question is from Cameron, and his question is, do you have any advice on demos and speed? He's worried that screen refresh rates for audience may not be keeping up with how fast he's going. It's not an issue for stage presentations, but he's conscious of it trying to go virtual.
There's absolutely no downside to bumping your own screen down to 1920 by 1080 if you're going to present, as well as using that as a resolution for recording, because it is just the lowest common denominator. So none of the modern screens out there should have an issue at that resolution. You do sometimes see issues where people are using like the new Retina display and the ultra high definition screens, and everybody else is not only on a lower resolution monitor, but on a smaller, laggier internet connection as well, can sometimes be a problem. So yeah, absolutely bump your own screen resolution down to 1920 by 1080 if you're going to do a live demo from your own desktop.
Perfect. Cameron, you happy with that? No.
Hi, Shiva. I'll just jump on. It's easier on audio. Yeah, the question was more around the lag in connection, because I know when I join calls, often there's a big delay in screen getting repainted. And if you're going through a demo, usually you try and rehearse your demos so that they're very smooth, but you're also trying to get through quite a lot in a short period of time. And if someone misses 5 seconds of a demo, that can actually be a lot of information that you're conveying or a critical point in the demo. So I'm very conscious of trying to get on a virtual call and present in the same way that I would do on stage. So I just didn't know if anyone knows any tips, tricks, or workarounds where you can make sure that, you know, your audience is seeing what you think they are.
It's always having a second device available, second or even a third device. I always have my PC. I have a second screen as well as a third then PC and my mobile phone. I'll have multiple open, and I can see and extend out all my screens so I can see it. And you can see how much of a lag you've got to slow down by, because if you can talk and present and keep it to the pace of your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty.
And Wagner asked if the PowerPoint thing is only available if you're on your own tenant. That's a good question. I actually haven't looked at that in terms of being a presenter in somebody else's tenancy. It'll be worth trying it out.
The reason why I ask is because in here, I was trying to follow, and the only thing that it shows was the whiteboard, not the PowerPoint. but I saw that on other times, which I think I was in my own tenant. So it might be a case in just another gotcha
thing. Yeah, yeah.
Because of the like most with all those tenants that we have right now, what's happening is you never know where you're going to be. So have the backup plan of share your desktop as well, but share the presentation if you can. Yeah,
I also can't confirm whether or not it's a restriction for you right now because this meeting is coming to you from our Microsoft.com tenancy as well. So it may be something special in terms of the restrictions that we have on our own tenancies here at Microsoft, but it's certainly worth checking out. And it may just be, it'd be interesting to find out if it could be solved by you actually having a proper guest account in the tenancy as opposed to you've just joined the meeting link as well. It's going to come down to the back end OneDrive and SharePoint permissions that hold the files for Teams.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, Sonia.
All right.
And I put the link from your blog post because it was the first one that popped up on my site when I searched. I think I read that 2 or 3 times.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Do we have any other questions for Sonia? That's shocking. I cannot believe this. They usually have. Okay, I've got the raise hand. I like seeing raise hand. Sahil, do you want to unmute yourself so you can ask your question?
Hello. Yes. Well, my question is. Well, I have actually 2 questions. First of all, I wear eyeglasses, so the reflection of the monitor in my eyeglasses is quite a big challenge, and I quite often see that the reflection is blue, and that looks ridiculous on me. That's one thing, how to get rid of it. And the other thing, my other question is about the laptop spec when running Teams live events and sharing desktop. My spec is, I do have Core i7 CPU, 16 GB of RAM, but my machine really suffers with the performance after I run any live events or even meetings. So those 2 questions.
Yeah. The glasses you can play around with a little bit, but even as I've been talking, occasionally it catches my glasses. It's a bit of a combination of, I've got a Logitech C920 camera that's on top of the monitor of my Surface Book. So a little bit of it is the angle of my monitor, and then the angle of my camera, and then the angle of my head. So I actually have my chin tipped slightly down, and I'm kind of peering over my glasses a little bit up at the web camera. And that's kind of the best way that I can find this combination to trick it so that I don't get as much of that reflect. But of course, as I get animated and I move my head around and stuff, you can see that every now and again it just picks it up. My husband's glasses actually have that non-reflective coating on them. I don't know whether or not that would make a difference or not, because we are under, quite glary light conditions. But yeah, that's kind of my trick when I'm very conscious of it happening, is it's just all about playing around with the angles. As opposed, the next question in terms of performance, that's an interesting one. And look, we've probably got Teams MVPs on here who can talk to that better than I can, because it's been a while. But I'm on, like I said, I'm on a Surface Book 2. It's one of the i7s. It's got 16 gig of RAM in it. And I haven't had any problems to date with running meetings or live events from this one. I don't know if any of our other MVPs can jump in terms of knowing what the minimum specs or recommended specs are for that. Nope, nobody knows.
I'm tempted to tag Cameron. Might you know the answer to the question? It's okay if you don't.
Cameron doesn't know the answer to that question. I wish I did.
All good. I'm just looking at the list of people in the call. Steve might know Steve Knudsen. Christchurch might know. No? Yes? No, I don't know if he can hear us. We will try to find people who are not in the...
I might throw in a tip. John here.
Yes, John, of course. Go ahead.
In team settings, there is a disable GPU acceleration. You should probably turn that off. It's kind of the opposite of what you think, but it ties too tightly to your Chrome's GPU usage. So if you have Chrome and Teams running at the same time, it could actually bomb, like it really drags down your experience. So you might want to turn that off.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that is a very good advice. Actually, I use Chrome or Chromium Edge.
Yeah.
And I work with Power BI. You know, the combination of Power BI and Teams is just a killer. You know, my laptop goes to heart attack. You know.
Yeah. So turn it off. Actually, I don't know whether it's a placebo effect, but I feel Chrome is more stable after I switch it off. So okay. I'll just throw that out there. Give it a go.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's a great tip. I've also dug up the hardware specs, and there's a good little article in Docs on how Teams uses memory as well, because it might actually be a memory hog thing. One of the things that I do even before this meeting is I close all my other apps, like anything running in the background, and I had Discord open, I paused my OneDrive sync, like anything else, Adobe Creative Cloud, like anything else that runs in the background, I'm a bit strict about going through and just shutting all that stuff down. So I'm running as pure just Windows and Teams as I can.
John, your GPU comment, is that if you don't have a dedicated GPU and you're using an integrated GPU on your processor? Because I'm finding if I've got a dedicated GPU and I've got more than 16 gigs of RAM, no dramas, I'll get multiple Teams sessions running concurrently. But if you've got 16 gig or less and an integrated GPU, then yeah, one session will just kill it.
Yeah, to me, it seems to be tied to how many Chrome sessions you have. And I think normally your Chrome browser is already GPU accelerated. So Teams just kind of add to that load. On a laptop running with the integrated graphics card, you kind of feel it that, especially what I find is you're in a team session sharing your screen, and then you switch to Chrome trying to demo the app, and your app just performs absolutely the worst at that point. So that's just
John, if setting we can do it when we join a meeting from the browser itself as opposed to Teams application.
Sahil, can you repeat your question for us, please? I don't think we caught that.
Does it apply to when you join a meeting from your browser as opposed to Teams application, Teams app?
John, do you know the answer?
No, I think that settings only through Teams app.
Okay.
I might just jump in here. It's Jack, Jack Skinner. I know a lot of people have had really mixed results experimenting with that balance of things. So native app browser, different browsers. I know some folks have been experimenting with eGPUs over USB-C and Thunderbolt, especially if they're running MacBooks. I'd go through a certain amount of experimenting at that point, rather than looking for specific specs. I know I get mixed performance, to Sonia's point around what's running in the background and what its memory or CPU profile is as well. It's going to be very different for whatever else is running on your machine.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Thanks, Sahil, for your questions. It seems like a lot of people benefited from the answers to those questions. Any other questions for Sonia or John or any of our possible teams MVPs in the call. Silence. This is bizarre. I am not used to this. Well, I've got a raised hand from Jack.
Wait. I have a question. Politely raised hand person.
That's all right. I wanted to ask a probing question to Sonia. If I had to pick between a microphone and using the integrated webcam in my laptop of choice, what would your one-step recommendation be between the two if I had to spend one amount of cash?
I would probably replace your web camera because I think that will make a bigger difference than the microphone. And some of the microphones in the web cameras these days are a step up from your integrated mic. So the Logitech C920 has a built-in microphone into the web camera that would be better than an older mic and an older webcam on a laptop if you only have budget to go one and not the other.
Brilliant, thank you.
Right.
I think Jack kind of read my mind. I'm going to flow on from this really nicely. I was going to say around microphones, any recommendations? Because I get a lot of report from my laptop saying that my sound quality is disgusting. So I'm looking to invest in something.
Now that could be your network connectivity. So sometimes when it's detecting that there's issues with your sound quality, it can also be lag or a low or intermittent bandwidth on your internet connection. So check that out first, especially if your device is connected to your Wi-Fi and it's not hardwired. If it is pure audio quality, like it's kind of like Mac or PC, like that debate, to be perfectly honest. There's a lot of people that like the Rode microphones. They've got a podcaster one that's really commonly used. The Blue Yeti is also a good mic, but it does tend to suffer. Yeah, it's the one, Kirsty. The Blue Yeti does tend to suffer a little bit from picking up a lot more background noise, but that's why I've got a filter called a Kyotica eyeball, and it's actually pictured in my blog post that does help reduce some of that noise. But apart from that, it's a really great microphone as well. So yeah, it's a Mac or PC question. The Rodes are fine, the Blue Yetis are fine. The way that I've got mine set up, and there's a picture in my blog post, I actually have the Blue Yeti on a Rode arm with a shock mount. So the arm connects, the arm is clamped to the desk, the arm comes up and above my screen, and then my microphone hangs upside down over the top of my web camera.
All right, thank you very much.
And there's another little audio trick that we use as well with recording. What you can't see, and I do this trick by keeping things not on camera when I'm still showing my real background. Soft furnishings are your best friend. And so one of the issues that we have with people who are trying to get audio quality and they're not in an audio studio is sound bounces. And so if it's plain walls, wardrobe doors, desks, other surfaces, like sound loves to bounce off hard surfaces, and the best way to get around that is by, if you don't want to go to the extent of buying egg carton foam or dampening sound panels or anything of that, you would laugh if you could see what is on the other side of my camera right now. I have a towel hanging off my microphone arm. I have a big soft blanket spread across my desk. And I normally, when I'm recording, if I'm not on camera, fill the room with as many cushions, blankets, and big soft toys from my kids' bedrooms as I can. And that's really cheap, and it makes a huge difference. It dampens your sound quality, it stops the echo, and it's just like being in a recording studio, but cheaper.
Thanks,
That's great.
Sonia.
Thank you so much.
We've got a couple more questions. I'll ask Rebecca Jackson to go off mute so she can ask her question directly.
Oh shit, I don't even remember what I asked. I think I just said Sonia was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was. I can't remember what my question was. I had a few comments about glasses because I'm a glasses wearer, so I wear a hat, and anti-reflective doesn't do much.
Right.
Like I paid the ultimate price at OPSM and still get glare. But Sonia, yeah, the session was amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And one question from Wagner.
Cool. Thanks, Shiva. So my question is, for people that is using the external microphone or professional microphones, or how do you deal with the audio coming back? From where it's coming back? Are you using like a little headset, or what are you doing with that?
Look, I'm not for here, but some other podcast recordings I do. I will do that. I'll actually put either my AirPods or preferably a wired set of earbuds is actually better. But the setup I've got at the moment, I don't intend to get that too much, but generally that's a good way to get around it.
Okay, so because I have like one of the lapel microphones that seems to be good that I use when I'm doing presentations. And I was planning to start using that, but my problem is what if it's going to have like a feedback loop from the audio coming from the computer. So the idea would be using like the AirPods or something like that is discrete instead of the huge headset.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing as well. You look much more natural because you are without like something hanging from your head, right? and that's the thing that can get really strange when you're doing the presentation.
Yeah. And someone's asked about a convenient way to share the recording. Again, this is more of a Teams question, but by default, if it's run as a Teams meeting, the meeting recording gets shared into Stream, and Teams by default will set the permissions based on who is attending the meeting at the time. Now, you can go in and change those permissions inside Stream to say allow anybody in your organization and change the permissions on that recording. You can even download that video out of Stream. So you can download not only the video file, but you can download the closed caption file. So if you want to put that anywhere else, if you want to upload it to your YouTube channel, you can absolutely get a copy of that recording folder to put it on another platform. Or if you've got the ability to set the permissions and you're happy to set the permissions to be wide open, you could even just share the link for people to watch the video in Stream just in their browser. Inside the Microsoft tenancy, we have a restriction on that. So any of the meetings that we record here, the maximum amount that we can put at is only people inside our organization for those recording videos, unless we go in and do some magic.
Just one tip on that one for live events that I find by mistake yesterday. When live events finishes, it has like on the meeting itself has a box with all the event resources, and on there you're going to find the recording of your video ready for you to download. I found it because I was like trashing everything that I got out of the meetup to find out what I could, and discovered that all those things are there, including plus the attendee and all the list of questions. So really good resources for you to share with your community after the meeting.
Cool. I've got one last question here from Jack, and just very mindful of the time that it's 6:15 here and 8:15 in Z. Jack, you want to go off mute so you can ask your question, and we might wrap up with that.
It's barely even a question. I want to sort of doubly emphasize what Sonia was saying around microphones being a very deep hole to fall down as you start to explore sound and sound design. But I've just spent a month going down that, Alice in Microphone Land moment. And the biggest things I can recommend are podcasting resources. So how to get started with podcasting over the home office setup type content that's, prolific on the internet right now, because it's so focused on that quick wins type setting. Second thing is, in terms of cost, Blue Yeti is probably a really good balance. It's not what I run, but I went down a different avenue. And supply chain at the moment is a fun one with home office setups. And I've seen Officeworks with heaps of stock with the Blue Yeti. So instead of pushing to the 100% perfect mark, I'd recommend looking at that if your local Officeworks has something, because it's pretty good, and good enough is good right now. So I just wanted to emphasize those 2 points, because it's hopefully going to save you all hours of sound design research. That was an awesome tip, Sonia.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Now, on that note, I thank you so much, Sonia, for like putting together that extensive list of tips for everybody. And the best part is we've got this recorded, so if anyone misses out on these things, you can always go back to the recording, which I will be uploading on YouTube, so other people can actually see this too. And I hope everyone in the call is comfortable with that, especially with those who have asked some questions and also shared some advice. If you have any reservations about it, please let me know, and I will figure out how we can work around this and still share the recording with everyone. On that note, thank you again, Sonia and Sarah. If they want to get in touch with you directly, you can either contact me and I will put you in touch with Sonia and or Sarah. Alternatively, it's pretty much sonia.cuff@microsoft.com and sarah.thiam, and that's spelled Tango Hotel India Alpha Mama at microsoft.com. Once again, that's being recorded and we will be uploading that on YouTube. So hopefully you do not get wild emails from the left field. Thank you again to you both, and thank you to everybody who stayed in this call. Really appreciate the time that you've made to join us. For the MVPs based in ANZ, I will see you all on Friday at 2 p.m. Australian Eastern for our virtual forum. Thank you, Sonia. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sarah. Take care, everyone, and look after yourselves and your loved ones. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Shiva. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.